Picture this. You're on a date. It's going okay. Maybe you'll text them tomorrow. Maybe you won't. Worst case scenario? They ghost you. You eat ice cream. You move on. Now imagine your love life was decided before you could walk by your parents, based on how many cows your family owned, and you meet your future spouse for the first time at the wedding, if you're lucky. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where dating wasn't complicated. It was basically impossible. And honestly, medieval romance makes your worst Tinder horror story look like a fairy tale. Before we dive into a world where love letters could get you excommunicated and sliding into DMs meant sending someone your sweaty glove, hit that like button if you've ever had a date so bad you wished you'd been born in a different century. And drop a comment. What's the worst dating advice you've ever gotten? Trust me, it's probably better than marry whoever your dad chooses while you're still in diapers. Let's travel back to a time when romance meant livestock negotiations and your entire extended family watched your every move. You wake up in the Middle Ages, not with an alarm clock, not with your phone buzzing, but to the sound of roosters and your mother shaking you by the shoulder because there's work to do. And somewhere in the back of your mind, maybe you think about love. Maybe you wonder who you'll end up with. Maybe you've noticed the blacksmith's apprentice and the way his arms look when he lifts something heavy. Stop right there. Put that thought away, lock it in a box, and bury it under the pig pen. Because here's the thing about medieval romance. It's not about you. It never was. If you were born into a noble family, your future was sealed before you could talk. Literally. Contracts were signed, land was traded, alliances were forged. And you? You were the currency. At 7 years old, you might be betrothed to someone you've never met. At 12, the marriage contract is finalized. By 15, you're standing in a chilly stone church next to a stranger, and the priest is asking if you take this person. You say yes, not because you want to, because your father's fields need their father's river access, because your family's bloodline needs their family's military protection, because the alternative is scandal, poverty, or worse. You don't even get to see their face until the veil is lifted, and then you're married. To a stranger, for life. If you're a peasant, it's slightly less formal, but not by much. Your parents still have opinions. They've been watching the neighbors for years. That girl who's good with sheep, she'd make a fine wife. That boy whose roof doesn't leak? He's husband material. You don't get to object. You don't get to say you're in love with someone else. You don't get to run away together, unless you want to be chased down by your entire village and dragged back for a lecture from the priest about obedience and sin. Here's the thing. Medieval movies don't tell you. Love wasn't the goal. Survival was the goal. Inheritance was the goal. Making sure your family didn't die out or get swallowed by a rival clan? That was the goal. Love was a luxury most people couldn't afford. Literally. You couldn't eat love when the harvest failed. You couldn't trade love for firewood in January. And yet, people felt it anyway. That's the cruel joke. You could spend years next to someone you were told to marry, someone chosen for you like livestock, and maybe affection grew. Maybe it didn't. Maybe you lay awake at night, thinking about the person you actually wanted, the one who smelled like hay and made your chest ache. Maybe you wrote their name on a scrap of parchment and burned it so no one would find out. Because finding out was the danger. Falling in love before marriage? Risky. Falling in love outside marriage? Scandalous. Falling in love with someone your family didn't approve of? That wasn't romance. That was rebellion. And rebellion had consequences. So you learned to want what you were given, or you learned to hide what you really wanted. You smiled at your wedding. You said your vows. You went home with a stranger and hoped that someday, somehow, this arrangement might feel like something more than a transaction. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. But either way, you didn't have a choice. That's the part we forget when we romanticize the past. All those tapestries and ballads and chivalrous knights? They were fantasies, escape hatches, ways of pretending that love mattered in a world where it usually didn't. Courtly love wasn't real love. It was performance. A way to feel something without disrupting the social order. Real love? Real love happened in secret, in stolen glances across the market, in whispered words behind the stable, in letters hidden under floorboards that could get you killed if they were found. Medieval people weren't robots. They felt passion. They felt longing. They felt heartbreak. They just couldn't do anything about it. So when you swipe left on another boring profile or complain about being ghosted, remember this. At least you get to choose. At least your heart gets a say. At least when you say, I do, it's because you want to, not because your father needed more sheep. Medieval romance wasn't romantic. It was economics with better costumes. And the only people who got to marry for love were the ones brave enough to risk everything. Now, before you get too comfortable with that medieval fantasy, let's talk about what it actually took to get someone's attention in an era when shooting your shot meant sending them a glove and hoping they didn't show it to their priest. So you've decided you're brave enough to try. You've seen someone across the village. Maybe it's the way they carry water from the well. Maybe it's the confidence in their step as they chase a runaway chicken. Your medieval heart does something complicated. You want to talk to them. You want to offer them something. You want them to notice you back. But before you take a single step toward romance, you need to ask yourself a question. And it's not, are they the one? It's not, do we have chemistry? It's this, what do you bring to the table? Because in the Middle Ages, that question has a very literal answer. If you're a young man hoping to court someone, you'd better have assets, land, livestock, tools, a roof that doesn't collapse when it rains, your charming personality and winning smile. Nice, but they won't keep anyone warm in February. You could write the most beautiful poetry in the world, and her father will still ask, yes, but how many pigs does he own? The answer better not be 0. If your older brother inherited the family farm, you're out of luck. If your father's best goat went to your cousin, you might as well give up. You could try the priesthood. At least there you'd have food and a roof, even if romance is permanently off the table. Some men did exactly that, not because they felt called to God, but because they felt called to literally anyone and couldn't afford to act on it. Now, if you're a young woman, the pressure is different, but just as heavy. Your family needs to provide a dowry. This could be money, land, furniture, linens, or a suspiciously generous number of geese. It doesn't matter how witty you are. It doesn't matter how beautiful. It doesn't matter that you've spent years learning to manage a household and could run a farm better than any man in the village. If your family can't pay up, you're likely to spend a long time perfecting your embroidery alone. There's a cruel math to medieval romance. Your worth isn't measured in kindness or compatibility. It's measured in what you own, what your family owns, what you'll inherit, what you'll bring to a marriage that can be traded, sold, or used to survive another winter. Let's say you actually find someone you like, someone who makes your chest ache when they walk past. You lock eyes at the market. There's a spark. It feels real. It feels important. It feels like something out of a story. It's completely irrelevant unless your families are on equal financial footing. Fall for someone poorer? That's not romantic. That's reckless. Your parents will sit you down and explain, gently or not, that love doesn't feed anyone when the crops fail. That the girl you're dreaming about comes from a family with no land and no prospects. And marrying her means dragging everyone down with you. That the boy who makes your heart race can't afford a roof. And do you really want to spend every winter freezing and hungry just because he has nice eyes? You might argue, you might plead, you might cry, and none of it will matter, because marriage isn't about feelings. It's about survival. It's about making sure the next generation doesn't starve. It's about building something stable in a world where stability is the rarest luxury of all. If you're noble, it's even worse. Your hand in marriage isn't just about your family's wealth. It's about borders, political favors, military alliances. You're not a person with a heart. You're a walking treaty. Congratulations. Your love life is now a matter of national security. Even peasants aren't safe from this logic. You don't marry for butterflies. You marry because your family's wheat field borders someone else's, and combining them makes both families stronger. You marry because your father needs more hands for the harvest, and the girl down the road has 3 brothers who can help. You marry because winter is coming and being alone means death. You dream of passion. You settle for irrigation rights. And yet, you try. You save a handful of berries. You carve a spoon when no one's watching. You find moments to glance across the market and hope, somehow, that they're glancing back. That maybe, just maybe, the math will work out. That your families will agree. That the numbers will align with what your heart already knows. Most of the time, they don't. Most of the time, you marry who you're told to marry. You learn to be grateful. You learn to pretend. You learn that love, real love, is something that happens to other people. People in songs, people in stories, people who could afford to feel. But sometimes, just sometimes, the numbers work. The families agree. The dowry is paid. The livestock changes hands. And you find yourself married to someone you actually like, someone you chose, someone who chose you back. Those were the lucky ones. And in the Middle Ages, luck was the only thing that mattered. Because when economics is the language of love, poetry doesn't pay the bills, and the only people who get to marry for romance are the ones whose families already have enough. Now let's say you're not a peasant worrying about pigs, or a noble dealing with treaties. Let's say you're a knight, shiny armor, big horse, absolutely no idea how to talk to women. Welcome to the strangest dating trend in human history. All right. You've decided you're brave enough to try. You're a knight. You've got shiny armor. You've got a war horse. You've got a reputation on the battlefield. You've killed men. You've captured castles. You've done things that bards sing about around fires. And none of it prepares you for this. Because she's standing across the great hall and she's wearing blue, and her hair catches the torchlight in a way that makes your chest hurt. You want to walk over. You want to say something. You want her to know you exist. But you can't. You absolutely cannot. Not because you're afraid, though you are. Not because she's surrounded by handmaidens and chaperones, though she is. But because the rules of engagement here are completely different from anything you've ever learned. Welcome to courtly love, the strangest, most frustrating, most emotionally confusing dating trend in human history. Here's how it works. You, the brave knight, choose a noble lady. Ideally, she's already married. In fact, the more unattainable she is, the better. Because courtly love isn't about actually being with someone. It's about wanting someone you can never have. It's performance art. It's spiritual suffering with a fancy hat on it. You vow to adore her from afar. Not from a creepy afar. From a respectful, poetic, very dramatic afar. You write poems about her eyes. You compose songs about her hair. You wear her colors at tournaments, so everyone knows you belong to someone, even if that someone has never spoken to you. The rules are specific. You may pine. You may sigh. You may joust someone who glanced at her too long. You may carry a token she gave you, if she gave you one, which she probably didn't. You may suffer. You must suffer elegantly. Suffering is the point. But here's the thing. You cannot touch her. You cannot speak to her alone. You cannot, under any circumstances, act on any of the feelings you're supposedly drowning in. The moment it becomes real, it stops being courtly love and starts being a scandal. Adultery, a sin, something that gets people killed. So you suffer. You write more poems. You wear her favor into battle and pretend it gives you strength. You lie in your cold bed at night and imagine what it would be like to hold her hand. Just hold her hand. That's all. You're not asking for much. You're asking for nothing, really. And even that, nothing is too much. What does the lady get out of this? On the surface, not much. She's supposed to act cold, detached, untouchable. She may acknowledge your existence with a nod. She may send you a ribbon if she's feeling generous. She may, in rare moments, let you kneel at her feet while she looks vaguely in your direction. But mostly, she pretends this whole arrangement is slightly embarrassing and entirely beneath her. And yet, there's power in being wanted. There's power in having someone suffer for you. There's power in knowing that across the battlefield, across the tournament grounds, across the Great Hall, someone is thinking about you. Someone wrote a poem about your eyebrows. Someone nearly died in a joust just to impress you. In a world where women had no choices, being the object of courtly love was a kind of freedom. You couldn't choose your husband. You couldn't choose your future. But you could choose, or at least accept, who suffered for you. You could hold that power in your hands like a secret. You could decide who got a ribbon and who got nothing. You could make knights tremble without lifting a finger. The church had opinions about this, obviously. Courtly love walked a dangerous line between devotion and lust, between admiration and sin. Priests warned against it. Confessors asked pointed questions. Sometimes the whole thing was just a way to feel something without actually doing anything, which made it technically acceptable and spiritually confusing. Was it romantic? Not really. Was it dramatic? Absolutely. Did it produce some genuinely beautiful poetry? Occasionally. Did anyone ever actually get together? Almost never, because the moment you crossed that line, the whole thing collapsed. The longing ended. The suffering stopped. And without suffering, what was left? Just two people. Alone. In a room. With no chaperones. With no poetry. With no performance. And that was terrifying in its own way. So you kept your distance. You kept writing. You kept wearing her colors. You kept pretending that this aching, hollow feeling in your chest was exactly what you wanted. That the point wasn't to have her. The point was to want her. Forever. Unrequited. Unresolved. Because resolution meant the end of the story. And you weren't ready for the story to end. So you juiced it. You composed. You suffered. And she watched from her tower, from her great hall, from behind her handmaidens, and maybe, just maybe, she thought about you too. Not in the way you wanted, not in the way the poems described, but enough. Enough to send a ribbon someday, enough to nod when you walked past, enough to make it all feel for one brief moment almost worth it. Then you went home alone. You went to sleep alone. You woke up alone, and you wrote another poem about it. Because in the world of courtly love, the only thing more important than devotion was the performance of it. And you were nothing if not a performer. Now, if all this suffering sounds exhausting, imagine trying to actually communicate your feelings. You can't talk to her. You can't touch her. You can't even stand too close. So what do? You send her something. A glove. A sleeve. A piece of your clothing that smells like you. Welcome to medieval texting. You're in love. Courtly love. The most complicated, frustrating, emotionally exhausting kind of love ever invented. You've written poems. You've worn her colors. You've juiced strangers who looked at her wrong. You've done everything a knight can do to prove his devotion without actually, talking to her. And now you need to communicate. You need her to know. You need to send a message. But you can't just walk up and speak. There are chaperones everywhere. Her mother knits in the corner with eyes in the back of her head. Her priest seems to materialize whenever you get too close. Her handmaidens gossip worse than the town crier. So what do? You send her your glove. Welcome to medieval texting. It's slower, it's smellier, and it's open to wildly inaccurate interpretation. Here's how it works. You take something of yours, something personal, a glove, a sleeve, a ribbon you wore in a tournament. You send it to her through a trusted messenger, a loyal servant, a bribed monk, a younger sibling who doesn't understand what they're carrying. And you hope she understands what it means. But here's the thing. What does it mean? Does it mean you love her? Does it mean you want her favor? Does it mean you're available for marriage negotiations? Does it mean you just had an extra glove and thought she might want it? No one knows. That's the point. The more cryptic, the better. If you're a woman and you receive a knight's sweaty linen rectangle, congratulations. You now have a romantic responsibility you didn't ask for, and absolutely no guidance on what to do next. Is he confessing undying devotion? Asking for a token to wear in battle? Suggesting you run away together? You have to interpret based on context, based on how well you know him, based on whether the glove smells like horses or desperation. If you're a woman wanting to send a message back, you have options. A ribbon, a piece of your hair, a small pendant, something subtle, something that says, "I notice you," without saying, "Run away with me tonight." Something with plausible deniability. Because plausible deniability is everything. Oh, this ribbon on my sword? No idea where it came from. Must have just appeared there. Scented with lavender. Completely random. Oh, this glove pinned to my chest. It's not from anyone specific. I just found it on my pillow. Weird. The whole system runs on ambiguity. If you're too direct, suddenly you're betrothed, promised, spoken for. And maybe that's what you want, but maybe it's not. Maybe you just want to flirt. Maybe you just want to feel something. Maybe you just want her to know you exist without committing to a lifetime of her father's judgment. Tokens are the perfect solution. They say everything and nothing. They're intimate without being scandalous. They're personal without being permanent. You can give someone your sleeve and still marry someone else next year. You can wear someone's ribbon and still claim you're unattached. It's all in how you interpret it. The risks are real, though. Give the wrong token to the wrong person, and rumors spread faster than plague. Receive one you didn't want, and suddenly you have to figure out how to return someone's sock without starting a blood feud. Some tokens got buried, some got burned, some got shown to priests who asked very pointed questions about what exactly was going on between you and that knight with the terrible poetry. And yet, despite all the risks, tokens were everywhere. Gloves pinned to chests, ribbons tied to sword hilts, handkerchiefs tucked into belts. Everyone knew what they meant, and no one said what they meant. The whole society ran on this secret language of fabric and longing. For commoners, tokens were simpler, but no less meaningful. A carved wooden spoon, a handful of berries, a piece of embroidery you stayed up late stitching, things you made with your own hands, things that cost time instead of money, things that said, "I was thinking of you," without saying it out loud. You'd pass them in the market, quick, hidden, your heart pounding like a war drum. And if they smiled, if they took it, if they tucked it away somewhere safe, that was better than any poem, better than any song. That was proof that you existed to them, proof that this impossible, ridiculous, forbidden feeling was real. And if they didn't, if they handed it back, if they pretended not to understand, you buried the humiliation and tried again with someone else. Or you didn't. Maybe you gave up. Maybe you entered the monastery. Maybe you spent the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd chosen a different token, a different day, a different person. Because in the Middle Ages, a piece of fabric could change everything, and usually it changed nothing. But you tried. You had to try. Because the alternative was silence, and silence was worse than rejection. So you sent the glove. You waited. You watched. And maybe, just maybe, she wore it. Maybe she pinned it where you could see. Maybe she looked at you across the hall with something new in her eyes. Or maybe she used it to wrap herring and married the fish merchant instead. Either way, you tried. That's all anyone could do. Now, let's say your token worked. She smiled. She kept it. You're making progress. Finally, you think. Finally, a chance to be alone together. But you're never alone. Not really. Because in the Middle Ages, love has an audience. And they're all pretending not to notice. Your token worked. She kept it. She wore it. She looked at you across the hall with something new in her eyes. Something that made your chest tight and your hands sweat inside your armor. This is it. This is the moment you're going to talk to her. Alone. Finally. Except you're not alone. You're never alone. Look around. Her mother is right there, stirring a pot that hasn't boiled in hours, watching you with eyes that miss nothing. Her father is sharpening something by the door, just in case. Her priest happened to be passing by on his way to evening prayers, at noon, and her weird cousin, who follows her everywhere. He's leaning against the wall, pretending to be asleep, but you You know he's watching. Welcome to the medieval dating surveillance state, where love is never blind. It's heavily monitored by your mother, your father, your priest, your cousins, your neighbors, and possibly God himself. If you're a young woman of marrying age, you don't go for walks. You go for walks with Margaret, who's been paid to watch you, and Margaret's aunt, who's judging your posture, and the family dog, who reports to no one but definitely has opinions. Even fetching water from the well requires an entourage. Someone is always watching. Someone is always reporting back. Someone is always ready to mention at dinner that you smiled at the blacksmith's apprentice for slightly too long. If you're a man trying to court someone, you need approval. Written approval, verbal approval, approval from her father, her mother, her priest, her grandmother, her 14 cousins, and the old woman who lives by the road and comments on everyone who passes. You show up with flowers, and her father's behind the door sharpening something. You try to compliment her baking, and her mother's pretending not to listen while definitely listening. You attempt a quiet moment alone, and suddenly the entire village needs to use the path behind you. The logic behind all this supervision is simple. Protect virtue. Preserve family honor. Prevent any unsanctioned touching, especially before marriage, especially alone, especially ever. The church has opinions about this. Lots of opinions. Priests give sermons about proper conduct between unmarried people. They write lengthy treatises on the dangers of flirtation. Yes, medieval clergy actually published anti-flirting manuals. Imagine being a monk, spending years copying warnings about eye contact by candlelight, while your brothers silently judge you from across the scriptorium. Even letters aren't safe. Some monasteries open love letters to check for moral content. Divine censorship. Your most private thoughts, read by a man in robes, who's probably going to mention it during confession. So what do? How do you connect with someone when you're never alone? You get creative. You find moments. Stolen glances across the market. Brief conversations during festivals when everyone's too drunk on mead to notice. Notes slipped into hands during the chaos of a harvest celebration. You learn to communicate in code, in silence, in the spaces between words. You learn that intimacy isn't about being alone together. It's about being together while everyone pretends not to notice. It's about the electric moment when your hands brush in passing and no one sees. It's about the letter hidden under a floorboard, read by candlelight, burned before dawn. It's about knowing that someone out there is thinking of you, even if you can't say it out loud. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the secrecy makes it sweeter. Sometimes the danger makes it real. Sometimes the fact that you could be caught, that you could be shamed, that you could be separated forever, makes every stolen moment feel like forever. But mostly, it's exhausting. Mostly, you just want to hold their hand without an audience. Mostly, you want to say I love you without whispering it behind the pig pen. You can't though. Not in this world. Not with these rules. Not with everyone watching. So you wait. You watch. You find your moments where you can. And you hope that someday, somehow, things will be different. They won't be. Not really. But you hope anyway. Because that's what love does. It makes you hope for things that will never happen. It makes you believe that the rules don't apply to you. It makes you risk everything for a moment that might not even come. And sometimes, rarely, it works. Sometimes you find a way. Sometimes you beat the system. Sometimes you get the girl and escape with your reputation intact. But mostly, you just learn to live with the watching. You learn to perform your courtship for an audience. You learn to say everything without saying anything at all. Because in the Middle Ages, love isn't private. It's public, it's communal, it's everyone's business. And the only way to survive it is to accept that you're never really alone. Now let's talk about what happened when people got tired of being watched. When they decided that love was worth the risk. When they ran.